The cold came early that year. It settled into the streets before December even reached its middle, wrapping the city in a quiet, biting silence. On Christmas Eve, the cold felt sharper, as if it knew this night mattered. Snow gathered along the sidewalks, pressed flat by hurried feet, then frozen hard again. Lights hung from shop windows and street poles, blinking softly in red and gold. But the warmth they promised never reached the ground. She walked slowly through it all, her steps careful, her shoulders tight. Her coat was too thin for this kind of weather, a hand-me-down she had owned for years. The zipper no longer worked properly, so she held it closed with one hand, while the other stayed buried in her pocket, fingers numb and aching. Each breath burned her chest. She kept her head down, not because she was ashamed, but because looking up hurt more. Around her, the city was alive. Cars passed, their windows fogged, music playing inside. People laughed as they hurried into warm buildings, carrying bags, boxes, wrapped gifts. Some talked on their phones, complaining about late dinners or crowded stores. Others held hands, pulling children along, promising hot food and sweets when they got home. No one noticed her. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to. She had learned not to expect anything from strangers. Expectation only led to disappointment, and disappointment was heavier than the cold. So she focused on the ground in front of her, counting steps, moving forward because stopping felt dangerous. If she stopped, the cold might win. Her stomach growled, loud enough that she pressed her arm against it. She had not eaten since the morning before. And even then, it had only been a small piece of bread someone had given her outside a cafe. She remembered the smell of food drifting out of restaurants as she passed them now. Meat, spices, fresh bread. The smells wrapped around her like a cruel joke. She passed a shop window filled with decorations. A tree stood inside, tall and perfect, covered in lights and ornaments. Under it were boxes tied with shiny ribbons. For a moment, she slowed, her reflection mixing with the glass. Her face looked older than it should have. Her eyes were tired, red from the cold and from holding back tears for too long. She did not recognize the person staring back at her. She turned away quickly. There was a time when Christmas meant something else to her. The memory came without warning, slipping into her thoughts like a ghost. A small room, warm, despite the winter outside. A simple meal shared with people who cared. Laughter that felt real. She pushed the memory away. Thinking about the past only made the present harder to carry. She reached a bus stop and sat down on the cold bench. The metal stung through her clothes. She shifted, trying to find a position that hurt less. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, landing in her hair, melting against her skin. She did not brush them away. Across the street, a group of people stood waiting to cross. One woman caught her eye for a brief second. Their gazes met. The woman hesitated, then looked away, tightening her scarf and turning her body toward the lighted crossing sign. That small moment hurt more than outright ignoring her. It reminded her that she was seen, just not wanted. She wondered how she had ended up here, sitting alone on a freezing bench on Christmas Eve, with nowhere to go. The question had no simple answer. Life had not collapsed all at once. It had slipped away piece by piece, quietly. Until one day, she realized there was nothing left to hold on to. She had not always been alone. There was a time when she worked hard, when her days were full and her nights ended in a bed with clean sheets. She remembered waking up early, tired but hopeful, believing that effort mattered. She believed that if she was kind and honest, things would work out. That belief had carried her far, until it didn't. The cold wind cut through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. She stood up again, her legs stiff. Sitting too long made it harder to move, and movement was the only thing keeping her warm. She pulled her coat tighter and began walking again, following no real direction. Anywhere was better than nowhere. She passed a church, its doors open, light spilling onto the steps. People were going inside, greeting each other softly. For a moment, she considered stepping closer. She wondered if she could sit in the back, warm herself, disappear into the crowd. Then, she saw a volunteer at the door, smiling, handing out programs. Fear rose in her chest. Fear of questions. Fear of being asked to leave. Fear of being looked at too closely. She kept walking. The streets grew quieter the farther she went. Shops closed, lights turning off one by one. The city felt different here, emptier, colder. Her shoes were wet now, socks soaked through. Each step sent a chill up her legs. She tried not to think about the night ahead. She did not know where she would sleep. She never truly did. Sometimes she found a sheltered doorway or a spot near a building that blocked the wind. Sometimes she stayed awake all night, afraid that sleep would make her too cold, afraid she would not wake up. Tonight felt like one of those nights. She stopped near a small park, its benches covered in snow. Trees stood bare and dark against the sky. She leaned against a fence and closed her eyes for a moment, just long enough to breathe. Her body shook, whether from cold or exhaustion, she could not tell. She thought about calling someone, then remembered there was no one to call. The phone she once owned was gone, sold long ago to buy food. Even if she had it, there was no number she felt she could dial. Pride had kept her silent for too long. And now silence was all she had. A loud laugh echoed down the street, pulling her attention. A group of young people walked past, arms full of wrapped gifts, faces bright. One of them stumbled and nearly dropped a box, and the others laughed harder. She watched them until they disappeared around the corner. She did not envy their gifts. She envied their certainty. The way they belonged somewhere. She pressed her lips together, forcing herself not to cry. Tears froze quickly in this weather, and she had learned that crying only made things worse. Still, her chest felt tight. Like something inside her was breaking open. She told herself she just needed to get through the night. Morning would come. It always did. With morning came another chance to survive. Another chance to find something to eat. Somewhere to rest. Survival had become her only goal. Dreams were too heavy to carry now. As she walked, her foot brushed against something on the ground. She looked down and saw a small paper bag, crumpled and damp. Her heart lifted for a second, hope flashing before she could stop it. She picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. Empty. She let it fall back to the ground. The city clock struck the hour, its sound carrying through the cold air. Midnight was close. Christmas was almost here. She stopped beneath a streetlight and looked up at the sky. Snow fell steadily now, quiet and endless. She wondered if anyone would notice if she disappeared into it. The thought scared her, not because she wanted to vanish, but because part of her felt that the world would not change if she did. She wrapped her arms around herself, took another step forward. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to keep moving, cold, alone, broken. Those words felt heavy, but they were not the whole truth. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear and the hunger and the exhaustion, something still held on. A small, stubborn part of her refused to give up. Even when there was no clear reason to hope, as Christmas night approached. She moved through the frozen streets, unseen by most, carrying nothing but that fragile piece of herself. She had no idea that before this night ended, a simple choice would test everything she believed in. And she had no idea that this cold, lonely Christmas would be remembered as the beginning of something she never thought possible. She kept walking, each step heavy, her mind spinning with the same questions she had asked herself all day. Where would she go tonight? How would she survive the cold? Every street corner looked the same. Every shadow seemed to whisper that she was alone, and every gust of wind reminded her that she had no one to rely on. The snow had started falling harder. The flakes coming down thick and fast, covering the streets in white and making every familiar sign look strange. She shivered and pulled her coat tighter, wishing it was just a little warmer. Her shoes had filled with snow, and each step squished uncomfortably beneath her feet. She thought about stopping, about sitting down somewhere out of the wind. But she knew if she stayed still too long, the cold would take over as she passed an alley. She heard the faint sound of a dog barking. She paused, listening, hoping it was nearby, hoping there was someone, anything, out there who wasn't completely indifferent to the world. But the barking faded quickly. swallowed by the wind and the snow. She swallowed hard and continued, telling herself she had to keep moving. Her stomach growled again, reminding her that she had eaten nothing since the small piece of bread that morning. She thought of the bakery she had passed earlier, the warm smell of fresh pastries still lingering in her memory. She wished she could just have a small piece, just enough to take the edge off. But the thought of going inside and asking, of being refused, kept her from trying. She found a small corner under a closed shop awning and crouched down, trying to get out of the wind. The cold still seeped in, creeping through her coat and into her bones. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to think of warmer places, happier memories. Anything that might keep her from thinking too much about the emptiness surrounding her. The city had grown quieter, sounds of traffic and chatter fading into the soft whisper of snow against stone. She remembered past Christmases, when her world was brighter. There had been lights, laughter, and food. A small room where she felt safe, where someone cared. She pressed her forehead against her knees, letting herself remember for a moment, before guilt and sorrow chased the memory away. Those times felt like a different life. A life she was not sure she would ever see again. Time passed slowly, the snow falling steadily. Her body ached, her teeth chattered, and her hands were nearly numb. But she forced herself to stay awake, knowing that sleep in this weather could be dangerous. She had learned to listen to her body, to recognize the signs that she needed to move or risk hypothermia. Tonight, every second counted. A small glimmer of light appeared in the distance. She squinted through the snow and saw a tiny cafe, still open despite the hour. The warm glow spilling out of its windows made her stomach ache with longing. Inside, people were talking and laughing, cups of hot drinks in their hands. She stood there for a moment, torn. Part of her wanted to go in, to warm herself, and perhaps ask for a cup of coffee or some bread. But fear held her back, the fear of rejection, of embarrassment, of being pushed away. She moved on, her heart heavy. The cafe disappeared behind her as she turned a corner, and the snow seemed to intensify, pressing down on her like the weight of the world itself. Each step was harder than the last, each breath burning in her lungs. She passed a small playground, empty and silent under the snow. The swings moved slightly in the wind, squeaking softly. She remembered a time when she had played in a place like this, when life had felt safe and full of possibility. Now, the playground felt like a cruel reminder of what she had lost. She pressed her hands to her face, linking back tears she could not afford to cry. Her thoughts wandered, as they always did, to the people she had known and lost. Friends who had drifted away, family who could not be found, strangers who had shown kindness only once or twice. She realized that each loss had chipped away at her sense of trust, leaving her with nothing but herself and the cold. Hours passed. She did not notice exactly when, but night had fully taken over the city. The snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the streets, making the world feel smaller and quieter. She wrapped her coat tighter, pressing herself against a wall for some measure of shelter. Her shoes were soaked, her toes numb, her fingers stiff. Hunger gnawed at her stomach relentlessly as she wandered. She noticed a group of people gathered around a small fire in the middle of the street. Volunteers had set up a place for the homeless to come and warm themselves. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach. Pride warred with need, but the cold eventually won. She stepped closer, keeping her distance, watching as people huddled around the fire, their faces illuminated in warm orange light. One of the volunteers noticed her and waved. She froze, unsure if she should go over. The volunteer smiled gently, a quiet invitation, and something inside her gave in. She walked toward the fire, her steps hesitant. The warmth was immediate and almost overwhelming, searing through the numbness in her fingers and toes. She pressed herself closer, grateful for even a few moments of relief. The people around her were kind, speaking softly, offering blankets and food. She took a small cup of soup, her hands trembling as she held it. The warmth of the liquid spread through her, reviving her body and spirit in ways she had not realized she needed. She listened to the chatter around her, 2 stories of survival, of people just like her who had endured too much yet kept going. For the first time that night, she felt a small flicker of hope. She did not speak much, her voice still wary, her pride not fully surrendered. But she let herself feel the warmth, let herself be part of the moment, even if only as a silent observer. The fire burned brighter, the laughter softer, the snow outside still falling, relentless but distant, as if the world had paused to let her rest for a while. And in that small, glowing circle, she began to believe just a little that maybe Christmas was not entirely lost. Maybe kindness still existed. Maybe, just maybe, miracles were possible, even for someone as cold, alone, and broken as she felt. She stayed near the fire for a while, letting the warmth sink into her bones. Her hands were still cold, but for the first time that night she felt safe enough to let her thoughts drift. She watched the volunteers move quietly, offering blankets and hot drinks, smiling gently at each person who approached. Their faces were calm, patient, and understanding. She wondered how they could be so kind when the world outside was so harsh. A small boy, more than 7 or 8, sat close to her, wrapped in a thick blanket. His eyes were wide, and he shivered slightly, though not as badly as she had when she first arrived. She noticed the way he clutched a small toy, a worn stuffed animal that seemed almost too fragile to hold. She smiled faintly, thinking how little things like that could mean everything when life felt impossible. The smell of the soup and the fire mixed with the faint scent of pine from nearby decorations, creating an odd sense of home, even in the middle of the street. She realized she hadn't felt anything like this in months. Not warmth, not safety, not a sense of belonging. Her chest tightened as the realization sank in. She had almost forgotten that feeling could exist. A volunteer handed her another cup of soup and a small sandwich. She took them gratefully, her hands still trembling. She didn't speak much, only nodded in thanks. Her throat felt dry, her voice weak, but she didn't need words right now. The presence of other people, of those who cared, was enough. Hours seemed to pass differently by the fire. The cold outside was still there, but it no longer felt like an enemy pressing down on her. Instead, it seemed distant, something she could face. Because for the first time, she had allies. Even if she didn't know their names. A woman volunteer noticed her sitting quietly and knelt down beside her. "You're safe here," she said softly. "You don't have to worry about anything right now." Her voice was steady, kind, and full of reassurance. She nodded, trying to absorb the words fully. For someone to say she was safe felt foreign, almost unbelievable. The boy beside her offered her a piece of his sandwich without a word. She hesitated, then took it, touched by the innocent generosity. They shared a small, silent meal, each bite warming them in more ways than one. The boy smiled faintly at her, and she realized she hadn't smiled in a long time. It was a small smile, quick and shy, but it felt good. Night deepened around them. The streets outside the small circle of firelight were empty, the city holding its breath under the falling snow. She watched people come and go, some arriving with nothing, some with small offerings, all seeking the same thing: warmth, comfort, and perhaps a moment of hope. Each time someone arrived, the volunteers welcomed them with patience, handing out blankets, food, and hot drinks. She began to understand the importance of their work. It was not just physical comfort they provided, it was human connection. The proof that someone still cared. Her stomach felt full now. And for the first time that night, her mind felt a little lighter. The sharp edge of fear that had gnawed at her earlier softened. She dared to breathe more deeply, to notice the little details she had ignored before. The twinkle of a string of lights nearby, the soft crunch of snow beneath others' feet, the warmth that radiated from the fire. She realized that even in a world that had seemed empty and cruel, small miracles existed. A man came over and offered her a blanket. She wrapped it around herself, the fabric soft and warm against her skin. The chill still lingered, but now it was bearable. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning back against the wall. Her mind wandered, thinking of what she could do next. She didn't want to stay on the streets forever. She wanted a place to call home, even if just a small corner where she could rest and feel safe. She watched as others talked, laughed quietly, and shared stories. She longed to speak, to join them, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she listened, learning from their resilience and quiet courage. Each person had their own story, their own struggles, but here they were together, sharing warmth and humanity. Time moved strangely. The snow continued to fall, the fire crackled, and she felt the weight of the night begin to lift, replaced by a flicker of hope. She realized that perhaps this was what kindness looked like: simple, quiet, and steady. It didn't need grand gestures or speeches. It just needed people to care enough to act. She reached out and touched the fire briefly, feeling the heat, letting it remind her that life could be gentle too. For months, maybe even years, she had survived on the edge, cold and alone. But now, she began to understand that survival was not enough. She deserved more than survival. She deserved to feel human again. The volunteers offered her a place to stay for the night, a nearby shelter with warmth, food, and a bed. She hesitated, unsure if she could trust herself to accept it. Pride whispered that she should refuse, that she should keep moving, keep hiding. But the warmth in her chest, the spark of hope, told her otherwise. She nodded to the volunteer, her voice barely a whisper: yes. The simple word felt monumental. It meant acceptance, trust, and the first step towards something she had almost forgotten she could have. They guided her gently, explaining where she would sleep and what she would eat, speaking softly so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed as she walked to the shelter. Snow crunching beneath her feet, she felt the chill begin to fade. Her steps were slower now, but lighter, filled with a sense of direction she hadn't felt in a long time. The city around her was quiet, the falling snow creating a soft, magical blanket over everything. She wondered if this was what Christmas really was. Not the lights, not the gifts, but the simple act of human kindness that made life feel bearable. Even when it was hardest, she entered the shelter and was greeted by warmth. Not just from the heat, but from the smiles and kindness surrounding her. A bed was prepared for her, food waiting on a table, and blankets soft enough to make her forget the chill outside. She sat down, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle into her bones. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to rest. To close her eyes without fear, sleep came slowly at first, her mind still holding on to the memories of hunger, cold, and loneliness. But as the hours passed, and the shelter filled with quiet breathing, laughter, and the soft hum of warmth, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that life could be different. Hope that kindness could change everything. Hope that she was not truly alone. The snow continued outside, covering the streets in silence and beauty. Inside, warmth and humanity thrived, wrapping her in a cocoon of safety. She understood now that miracles did not have to be loud or dramatic. They could be small, quiet, and profound in ways that changed lives forever. As she drifted to sleep, she thought of the boy, the volunteers, and the fire. She thought of the kindness that had reached her in the midst of her cold and loneliness. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Christmas could be magical, even for someone like her. Morning came slowly. The light was soft and pale, filtered through frost-covered windows. She opened her eyes, feeling the comfort of the warm bed beneath her, the blankets wrapped around her like a protective shield. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, the cold night outside already feeling like a distant memory. Then it returned: the streets, the snow, the hunger, the loneliness, but it no longer felt like an impossible weight. She had survived it. She had warmth, safety, and people who cared. She sat up slowly, stretching her stiff limbs. The shelter was quiet now, most of the people still asleep or moving softly, speaking in hushed tones. She got up, her feet touching the soft floor instead of freezing concrete. The small room, simple and clean, made her realize how long it had been since she had felt even this little bit of normalcy. She smiled faintly, a shy, tentative smile that felt almost unfamiliar. Breakfast was served shortly after she got dressed. She joined others at the long table, the smells of warm bread, eggs, and coffee filling the room. She hesitated, unsure if she belonged, but the volunteers smiled and invited her to sit. She took a plate, appreciating every bite more than she thought she could. The taste of food, warm and plentiful, made her eyes water. She had not realized how much she had missed the simple act of eating without fear or shame after breakfast. She wandered around the shelter. It was more than a place to sleep. It was a hub of care. People were offered counseling, access to showers, clean clothes, and support to find work or permanent housing. She watched others move through the space, some quiet, some chatting softly, all with the same goal: finding hope, rebuilding themselves, taking the first steps toward a better life. She approached a volunteer, a woman who had helped her the night before. The woman smiled and asked if she wanted to join a small group meeting, where people shared stories and discussed how to move forward. She hesitated, unsure if she was ready, but something inside her nudged forward. She nodded, and the woman led her to a cozy room with chairs arranged in a circle. The meeting began quietly. People spoke in turns, sharing moments of struggle, loss, and sometimes small victories. Listening to them, she realized she was not alone in her experiences. Others had faced despair, hunger, and fear. Others had felt the bite of the cold, the sting of rejection, the emptiness of loneliness. Yet, despite everything, they had come here. They had chosen hope. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated, then slowly shared pieces of her story. The fear that her words might be judged made her heart pound. But the room was silent, full of attentive eyes and understanding faces. She spoke of the nights on the cold streets, the hunger, the fear, and the endless loneliness. She did not speak of shame, only the facts, letting the weight of the words show without apology. When she finished, a soft murmur of understanding went through the room. One person reached out and held her hand briefly. Another nodded with quiet empathy. The volunteers offered gentle encouragement, affirming her courage. She felt a small shift inside, a realization that speaking her truth, admitting her vulnerability, was not weakness. It was strength. After the meeting, she spent the day participating in small tasks around the shelter. She helped sort donations, fold blankets, and prepare simple meals. The work kept her hands busy and her mind focused. For the first time in months, she felt useful, like she belonged. The smiles she received in return were genuine, not pitying, and they gave her confidence she had not known she could feel. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, covering the city in a fresh layer of white. She stepped outside for a moment, letting the cold air touch her face, feeling it differently now. It was no longer an enemy. It was a reminder of the night she had endured, the strength she had found, and the kindness that had reached her. She realized that life was unpredictable and harsh, but also capable of immense generosity. A young volunteer approached her, offering a cup of hot chocolate. She accepted, holding it between her hands, feeling the warmth spread through her. They walked together, talking quietly about small things, about hopes and fears, about Christmas traditions. She realized she could laugh again, even if just a little, and it felt like a miracle. She returned to the shelter and helped with the afternoon meal. People arrived, some returning from the streets, others seeking comfort for the first time. She offered blankets, served food, and shared smiles. Each small act felt meaningful, more than she could have imagined. Giving, even in small ways, filled her heart with a new kind of warmth. As evening approached, the shelter gathered everyone for a simple celebration. Candles were lit, soft music played, and the room glowed with warmth and human connection. People shared stories, laughter, and small gifts, each gesture reminding her that even in the darkest times, light could be found. She watched the small boy from the night before, laughing as he opened a tiny gift. Her heart swelled with a feeling she had almost forgotten: joy. She realized that happiness did not have to be grand or loud. It could be found in small moments, in shared warmth, and kindness extended and received. When the celebration ended, she returned to her bed, exhausted but content. She lay down, the blankets wrapping around her like a promise. She closed her eyes, thinking of the people she had met, the care she had received, and the hope that now felt real. She realized that Christmas was not about gifts or decorations. but about human connection, kindness, and the courage to keep moving forward. Even when life seemed impossible, as she drifted to sleep, she thought of the journey that had brought her here, from cold streets to warmth and safety, from loneliness to community, from despair to hope. She understood that miracles did not always arrive in grand, sudden bursts. Sometimes they came quietly, in the form of a smile, a cup of soup, a warm blanket, or the presence of someone who cared. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that her life could change, that kindness could transform the darkest night into something beautiful, and that even the coldest, loneliest Christmas could become a beginning rather than an end. Days passed, slowly but surely, each one filled with small victories and quiet moments of healing. She had begun to learn the rhythms of the shelter, the morning breakfast, work assignments, the shared laughter and stories. Life was no longer a battle to survive each second. It had become a place where she could breathe, reflect, and even dream. She started helping new arrivals, offering blankets, serving food, and speaking quietly to those who were too shy or scared to ask for help. Each smile she received in return became a piece of her own healing. She realized that kindness was a cycle. When you received it, you could give it back, and the world felt a little lighter with every act. Her confidence grew slowly. She participated in group discussions, sharing her story in more detail, offering insights she had gained through her experiences. Others listened, nodded, and sometimes asked questions. She discovered that people were hungry not just for food and warmth, but for understanding, for connection. For the simple knowledge that they were not invisible, the volunteers began to help her look for opportunities beyond the shelter. They offered to assist her with documents she had lost, a small bag of personal belongings, and eventually, guidance on finding temporary work. She felt nervous, afraid of stepping into a world she had been away from for so long, but the support around her made her brave. She realized that she didn't have to face the world alone anymore. One afternoon, a delivery arrived for the shelter, a box of winter clothes and shoes from donors who wanted to help. She opened a pair of boots and a thick coat. The coat was heavy, soft, and warm. She held it against herself and felt tears rise unbidden. For years, she had faced winter with thin layers and fear, and now, a simple gift gave her a sense of dignity she had almost forgotten. She walked outside later, her new coat wrapped around her, boots crunching against the fresh snow. The cold still nipped at her face, but she faced it differently now. The cold was no longer a relentless enemy, but a reminder of the journey she had survived. The snow glittered under the morning sun, and she allowed herself to marvel at its beauty, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in months. The small boy she had met on Christmas Eve was now a familiar presence, and they shared quiet moments of companionship. She taught him little games, laughed softly as he told stories about his life, and found joy in seeing him happy. Their bond reminded her that life, even when broken, could hold pockets of light and warmth. Volunteers suggested she'll learn new skills at the shelter, like basic cooking, sewing, and even helping to organize donations. She found herself enjoying these tasks. They gave her a sense of purpose, structure, and achievement. For the first time, she felt capable of contributing, not just surviving. Her hands, once only used to protect herself from the cold, were now building, helping, and creating small changes in the lives of others. One evening, as she helped prepare the meal for the residents, a woman approached her with a warm smile. She explained that a local family had offered to sponsor one person from the shelter for a small, apartmenta, safe place to stay, just until she could get back on her feet. The volunteer asked if she would like to be considered. Her heart raced. She had dreamed of a safe home, but had been too afraid to hope it could be real. She nodded, words caught in her throat. The following days were filled with preparations, paperwork, and anticipation. She packed a small bag with the few belongings she had, careful to include mementos that reminded her of strength and survival. She thought about the night she had spent on the cold streets, about the fire, the volunteers, the small boy, and the acts of kindness that had carried her forward. Each memory was a reminder that life could change in ways she could never have predicted. Finally, the day arrived. She stepped into the small apartment, taking in the warmth, the quiet, and the safety. For a moment, she just stood there, letting it sink in. She realized that she had made it, that she had survived, and that the world had opened a door for her when she had almost given up. She unpacked slowly, placing her few belongings carefully. Every item had a story, a piece of her journey. The bed was soft, the kitchen simple but functional, and the small living space filled her with a sense of possibility. She realized that she could start again, build a life, and perhaps even find joy again. That night, she sat by the window, looking out at the city covered in snow. The streets were quieter now, the harsh edges softened by the blanket of white. She thought of the people she had met, the kindness she had received, and the journey that had brought her here. Her heart was full of gratitude, not just for the warmth and safety, but for the lessons she had learned about resilience, humanity, and hope. She thought about the future uncertain, yes, but full of possibilities. She could find work, continue learning, help others, and perhaps even find love and friendship again. She understood that life would not always be easy, but she now carried the knowledge that she could endure, adapt, and thrive. The small boy from the shelter visited, bringing a drawing he had made for her. It was simpler: snow-covered city, a small fire, and a figure wrapped in a warm coat. She laughed softly, tears in her eyes. It was a reminder that even small gestures could hold great meaning, and that kindness created connections that could last a lifetime. She placed the drawing on her refrigerator, a symbol of the journey she had taken and the hope she now carried. She realized that her life was no longer defined by cold, loneliness, or despair. It was defined by resilience, compassion, and the small miracles that had reached her in the darkest times. As Christmas approached again, she prepared a small meal for herself. Thinking of the fire, the volunteers, and the friends she had made, she felt a deep sense of peace. She understood that kindness was not just about receiving, but about sharing, about creating moments of warmth for others even when life had been harsh. She had been given a miracle, and now she could continue it. Passing it forward, she sat by the window, watching the snow fall, reflecting on how far she had come. From cold, alone, and broken, she had found warmth, community, and hope. Her journey was not over, but she had learned that miracles could be found in the smallest gestures. In shared meals, in a warm blanket, in a simple smile. And with that knowledge, she knew she could face whatever came next, carrying the spirit of kindness with her. Always. The days that followed felt different, brighter, and more full of possibility. She woke each morning with a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. Her small apartment, though modest, was now her sanctuary. She arranged her belongings carefully, each item a testament to survival, resilience, and hope. The space was quiet but comforting, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of control over her life. Her mornings began with simple routines: breakfast, a shower, and tidying up. Even the small act of making her bed gave her a sense of accomplishment. The outside world was still unpredictable, but here she had order, safety, and a beginning. She appreciated these simple things in a way she never had before. Each day was a chance to rebuild herself, not just physically, but emotionally. Volunteers from the shelter continued to support her, checking in, offering guidance, and sometimes just sitting quietly with her while she shared her thoughts. Their consistent presence reminded her that kindness was steady, that it could be counted on, and that it was a force powerful enough to change lives. She reflected on how many times she had walked past strangers on the street, how many times she had been ignored, and now how dramatically a single moment of care had shifted the course of her life. She began exploring opportunities for work. With the guidance of the volunteers, she applied for a few small jobs in the neighborhood. Each application brought anxiety and hope in equal measure. She had been out of the workforce for so long that the idea of returning was both thrilling and terrifying. But with each form she filled and each interview she attended, she felt her confidence grow. She was learning to trust herself again. One afternoon, she took a walk through the city. The snow had melted slightly, leaving streets damp and slick, but the air was fresher, lighter. She paused to look at a shop window filled with small trinkets and decorations. For a moment, she let herself imagine being part of a life that included such simple joy's warmth. Laughter, friends, and small celebrations. She realized she had been denying herself hope for too long, and now she could allow it back in. Her relationship with the small boy from the shelter grew stronger. She helped him with schoolwork, read stories, and listened to his ideas and dreams. Seeing his resilience and curiosity reminded her that life, even after hardship, could still be filled with wonder and learning. She became a source of guidance for him, someone he could trust and rely on. And that gave her a new sense of purpose. The shelter invited her to participate in a mentorship program, where she could help others experiencing homelessness or struggling with isolation. She agreed. Teaching and guiding others, sharing her experiences and the lessons she had learned, became a source of joy and fulfillment. She understood now that her past struggles did not define her. They equipped her to help others, to provide warmth and hope where it was most needed. As Christmas approached once again, she reflected on how much had changed in a year. She had gone from cold, alone, and broken to being part of a community, safe in a home, and filled with hope. She wanted to share her gratitude, to give back in the ways she had been given so much. She began preparing small gifts for the shelter, simple items she had saved for, each chosen to bring comfort and joy. She wanted others to feel the impact of kindness as she had. On Christmas Eve, she returned to the shelter to help with the annual celebration. The room was filled with people seeking warmth, comfort, and human connection. She helped serve meals, offered blankets, and shared smiles. She watched as faces lit up with each act of care. She realized that kindness was contagious, and that miracles could be created through consistent, small actions. Her heart swelled with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Later that evening, she took a moment to step outside. Snow had begun falling lightly, soft and silent. She inhaled the cold, crisp air and looked up at the sky, reflecting on her journey. She had endured hunger, fear, and loneliness, and yet she had emerged stronger, more compassionate, and more aware of the power of human connection. The world was harsh, yes, but it was also filled with people capable of remarkable kindness. She returned to the celebration, holding a small cup of cocoa, and joined the circle of volunteers and residents. They shared stories, laughter, and music. Children played quietly, adults exchanged warm greetings, and she felt an unbreakable sense of belonging. The fire that had once been her literal lifeline on a cold Christmas night had transformed into a metaphorical one, a light that connected her to others, a warmth she could now carry forward. She thought of the strangers who had ignored her, of the moments she had felt invisible, and realized that those experiences had made the moments of kindness even more powerful. Each gentle smile, each shared meal, each warm blanket had the ability to change a life, and she was now part of that chain. As the night wore on, she found herself standing near the window, watching the snow settle quietly over the city. She thought of the people who had helped her, the friendships she had formed, and the small boy whose laughter reminded her of joy. She understood that her journey was not just about surviving. It was about living fully, embracing compassion, and using her experiences to help others. She returned to her apartment late that night, her heart full. She placed a small candle on her windowsill, lighting it to symbolize the warmth she had found and the hope she carried. The flame flickered, soft and steady, a reminder that even in darkness, light could endure. She realized that the world, despite its challenges, was capable of incredible miracles, and that she had become part of one as she lay down to sleep. She reflected on the entire journey from the cold streets, the hunger, the fear, the loneliness, to warmth, kindness, and hope. She understood that life could be cruel, but it could also be beautiful, and that human kindness had the power to transform even the darkest circumstances. Her story, she knew, was not just about survival, but about the resilience of the human spirit, the impact of compassion, and the miracles that occur when people care. With the snow falling outside, a soft blanket of white covering the city, she closed her eyes, grateful for every moment that had brought her to this place. She had been broken, cold, and alone. But now she was whole, warm, and connected. She had found not just safety, but purpose. She had learned that even in the harshest winters of life, the smallest acts of kindness could create a lasting, transformative miracle. And with that understanding, she drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, ready to embrace the life she had been given, carrying the spirit of hope and compassion into every day that followed.